Kathryn Maggs, who you all know, and Aimee Ross-Taylor as well is joining us today, all in the same room. And let me just preface the fact that it's a really hot Queensland day here where they are in Australia, and we're talking 80% humidity. So they're, if you see them doing a little bit of the fanning motion, it's quite hot. So fantastic to have you on. Those that are watching, if you like what we do here, don't forget, sign up for our Team Craft newsletter. You'll find that in the show notes. Join us at remoteaf.co and click on the old community button. Join us at our community. Lots of people talking about all the stuff you hear today. And also keep an ear out. Big announcement coming. We've been cooking up something special at Remote AF, so we're looking forward to giving that to you as well. Enough of that stuff. Let's move on. Before we go any further, everybody who's watching this probably knows Kathryn and myself reasonably well because we've been on before. I've been on a few times myself. Aimee Ross-Taylor, how about you introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are?
Hi, thanks, Tony. Thanks so much for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here. So my name's Aimee Ross-Taylor. I am a mother to 4 beautiful children, and I start with that for a very intentional reason. I work in a digital personalization space, so I spend a lot of time working with very, very smart people looking at data to understand behaviours and then what we can do with that behaviour. So that's my space is very much understanding how we behave, what makes up our identity, which is why I mentioned the children, and then how we can create value from understanding how people behave. So I'm very excited to be here today talking about psychological safety.
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation, very poignant at the moment, right, given our environments, and particularly digital psychological safety rings with a lot of people. I mean, we live in a world of digitality, and yes, that is a world, people. It means the art of living and working in a digital environment. So, and I think that describes exactly where we are today. We've got digital natives, digital nomads, but the struggle is real with some of the things that go on in the digital world. What I'd like to ask the pair of you, first of all, is what does actually digital psychological safety mean to you? You can find it out between you now.
I think, Tony, before answering that question, I just want to touch on it as a reminder for people, what is psychological safety?
Sure. Yeah.
First and foremost. And, when we're talking about creating a safe space for people to, I guess, take those personal risks, to be vulnerable, to admit to mistakes, to share their ideas, their opinions, their concerns, all in an environment where they know they're not actually going to have any negative consequence to that. So when you shift that from a physical environment and then you say, well, what does that mean from a digital point of view? It's how do you create that safe space, whether it is with your work colleagues, whether it is just any type of digital interaction, right? Whether it's social media, working remotely, how do you create that digital psychological safety where people feel safe to interact, speak up, share their vulnerabilities without that negative consequence? And let's face it, with the digital world that we're living in, it's so easy for people to respond in a judgmental way because they're hidden behind that screen, that keyboard.
Yeah, I'm going to extend on that. I'm not going to fight you over that one because I think you're right. So for me, the idea of psychological safety is very much having a safe space to take interpersonal risk. And what I mean by interpersonal risk is to be able to work one-on-one with another person, one-on-one with a brand or a company that you're working with, or I work in the finance industry, so for me it's about what we're banking with and who we trust with our finances. So it's all about creating that safe sort of interaction. When you then transfer that to a digital perspective, you can then overlay that with remote working, of course, creating a safe space for those digital interactions with your teams and your broader organization. When you're an individual and you're working with, or shopping online, banking online, those types of activities, it's about having that safe trust in the ecosystems that are supporting your jobs to be done or what you're needing to work on. But I also consider it a lot in terms of the children. And the reason why I brought up the children to begin with is I think this concept of psychological safety starts right from day dot. It's very much a life journey. And then what we're finding more and more these days is that concept of psychological safety transferring into a digital space. The millennials that are coming through have quite a different view. They have a much, much higher trust in our digital ecosystems. And so for me, it's quite fascinating watching whether that trust is transferable. So when I talk about a digital psychological safety, it's got a multiple faceted sort of meaning. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. And, if you look at it, our age group grew with digital, but our children have grown up with it. And so they're digital natives, if you like. And so that brings a whole host of different changes and things. So that's the interesting question I want to ask you about that is so we're looking, as you said, millennials or digital natives have a different aspect of that. So what are some of the aspects of the issues that you see there?
So can I jump into that one?
Absolutely.
Look, I
can separate you two. It's okay.
No, it's great fun. I think some of the issues that we see there and where that relates, I think, to workforce is the up and coming. So the kids that are growing up with the digital natives, how they behave, then how they bring that to the new workforce. So I think for me, it's about how do we protect these kids as they come up and they join the workforce? How do we teach them how to create that safe environment? So I think some of the issues that we're looking at is the etiquette, how we actually behave online and how we communicate with people. So one of the things I often talk about is every interaction that you have is an opportunity to build trust and understanding. And so when it comes to building a culture at work, every opportunity that you have with your team online, whether you're offline as well, for wonderful that we're able to do that these days, every opportunity can build that trust or erode that trust. And so I think the issues that you're asking about, it's about teaching these kids that are up and coming how to create a safe space and how to protect themselves, to make sure that everything that they're doing is something that they're proud of. And we often talk about behaviours that are online. You tend to, once you put it out there, you can't get it back. So I think what we need to do is put these good frameworks in place to teach them how to interact online in a safe way, protect themselves and protect others, and then transfer that into a work environment.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree. And I think, the biggest challenge is in a digital space, I think one of the biggest challenges is that anonymity, right? Like it is, to your point, once it's out there, it's out there. And, we've always had that challenge, even with email. You could send something off that would start to erode that psychological safety out of emotion, and it's out there, and the other person receives this heated unexpectedly, but they could just then walk up and go over and confront that person, right? In a digital world, it's even more distant, more, how do you then resolve that? And I think it makes it more difficult to gain back that trust once it's eroded in a digital world. So I agree, we've got to, as leaders, as parents, we've got to set really clear boundaries around how we're going to use technology. What is the culture we want to create? What are the behaviours we accept and don't accept? And in a digital space, as we've talked about before, Tony, leaders need a different skill set for that. They need a different tool set to be able to consistently hold their people accountability, but setting those clear boundaries and frameworks and structures in the first place.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry, you were going to say something, Amy?
I was actually going to say that's something I've really taken a lot of value out of the Agile framework, having those regular ceremonies to check in with people, to check in to say, hey, are you going okay? What's been going well? What hasn't been going well? That, for me, is something that's been really valuable as a leader and as a parent.
Absolutely, yeah.
To make sure that you're checking in and any problems that we are having don't fester. They are addressed straight away or addressed as quickly as possible. And then you can take action and move on. So that iterative check-in and those iterative changes from a psychological perspective and behaviours perspective is something I've always found really valuable.
I was just going to say there's a question. So I like what you're saying there, but and the question that's come through is that's a big transfer of parental duties to add to what we already do. Have you got any strategies for coping? Well, there you go.
Oh, on a Friday morning, coffee. Parenting is difficult. And I mean, we don't sign up to parenting because it's easy, but it's also the most valuable thing that I've ever done, you know, and I am a much better person for becoming a parent. It's forced me to really focus on my communication skills. And it's actually made me a better leader at work as well, because when you have to explain things to your children and you want to explain things, you want to teach them, you want to build that sense of safety and that sense of identity with them, then that teaches you a different way of communicating with adults as well. So when it comes to coping, look, in my personal view, having a support network is incredibly important. And that's also something that you can apply work-wise and at home. Having that good support network and having people to talk to and to lean on and to mirror back what's going on for you, I think those people are incredibly important.
Yeah, and I would add to that boundaries. We're really good at setting boundaries for other people and helping them set their boundaries, but we're very bad at setting boundaries for ourselves. So be really clear on what boundaries you need and communicate that to people, and then maintain them, stick by them. And self-care. You've got to take time out for you. I've just, I'm stretching myself across family and work and a number of different spaces at the moment, just over the last few weeks. And it was only last night I was reflecting and thinking, all my self-care practices have just gone out the window in the last 3 weeks. And I'm feeling really tired and worn out and emotionally drained as a result of that. So self-care and boundaries are, as well as that support network, really key to just coping with day-to-day life in general.
It's so easy to let slip. You get wrapped up in that world, don't you?
You do. If I can anchor back in what we were just talking about ceremonies as well, I think those ceremonies in a personal life are just as important. Yeah. And having that ability to check in with your children, your partner, your team, your friends, to be able to say, hey, are you okay? Do you need an extra coffee today?
And yourself.
And yourself, absolutely. But it is having those regular routines to be able to check in, to repair and reconnect.
Yeah.
And the emotional intelligence that is really important these days, which I think is exacerbated by our digital environment. So since COVID, and we are learning that we need a lot more emotional intelligence, and we need to be able to communicate how we're feeling, and that it's okay to feel things at work and at home. To your point, the boundaries have been blurred so much over the last few years, and I'm sure you've had countless podcasts where the kids have popped up in the background, or the dog's gone off, or power's gone out, or something crazy's happened, because that's just life. So we do need to be a lot more flexible, but having those opportunities to check in, repair, and reconnect is always going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, we have a saying at Remote AF with work, work is in your home and home is in your work now. So you actually do need to have that space that you separate.
Yeah.
So that enables you to have that time away. Otherwise, you just digitally burn out, right? So
absolutely.
I think that's important. Let me sort of go a little bit to the right now and head more towards the corporate side of things. And not that I'm sort of saying the personal stuff isn't important, because it melds into that. But let's put a bit of a corporate focus on this, because this applies to our work life as well.
Absolutely.
We're working in a digital environment, then psychological safety becomes a really important thing, team-wise, person-wise, leadership-wise. Talk to me a little bit about that, guys.
Well, I think it's really important, from a leadership point of view, you've got to actually understand what psychological safety is, right? Like it is I don't want to say it's a buzzword, but it is something that is used predominantly in the corporate world and used frequently. But do leaders actually genuinely understand what that is? And once they've understood it, how are they putting it into practice? Because even in a physical space, it can be tricky. Like when you are co-located, it can be tricky. So shifting anything, from a leadership point of view, shifting anything from co-location to remote requires you to look at it completely different. So when we're talking about implementing or creating an environment of psychological safety, leaders especially need to actually show behaviours and action that support what they're saying. You can't have that disconnect. That's first and foremost. So when you're moving to a digital world, it's how can you make sure that you are remaining consistent? When you're implementing all of those ceremonies that Amy was talking about, those check-ins, when you've agreed on what those behaviours that we're going to work to are, how do you ensure consistency as a leader and ensure that your behaviour is consistent? And if it's not, taking ownership of that, and calling that and going, hey guys, I realise that, no excuses, shouldn't have done that, really apologise. So I think, leaders have a big responsibility here to not only create the environment and hold their people accountable, but also to make sure they're holding themselves accountable.
Absolutely. I think that emotional intelligence that I mentioned that you need in a personal life, you bring that into work, and particularly as a leader, that allows you to understand that all of your team have different family lives that they're also bringing to the environment. And that's your starting point. So when anyone turns up to work every day, they've come from home, they've come from potential children or whatever's been happening at home. That's how they arrive at work. So there's an understanding that they already come preloaded with life. And then you get to work and then you have to create those boundaries and say, okay, we're not discounting what's going on at home. We're very well aware of that. But when we're here at work, we're here to achieve a goal. And I think something that we often talk about is getting on the same page. So coming together to look from the same place. And that's about what are your shared goals. And to Kathryn's point, that allows us to create boundaries around what we're focusing on. It allows us to try and structure our time management. It allows us to try and structure our team time. And I think it also creates that space for the really important face-to-face bonding that we can achieve now, post-COVID. It really makes those connection points a lot more important to check in, to have that body language. And I mean, it's wonderful that we've got video these days and we can have online, video chats and video meetings, but it's not the same as being face-to-face with somebody and reading their body language, hearing their tone. It's different face-to-face and online. So I think it highlights the need for that connection.
It does, and really valid point. But in some cases, you don't have that. Even though COVID's passed, there are still, situations where you can't have that face-to-face.
Yep.
So then it's about what are those new ceremonies, those new frameworks and rituals that you need to put in place as a leader to make sure that you're connecting with your people, not just at that work level. Like as a leader, you've got to make time to create those interactions where they can feel that they can be more vulnerable and they can share more about just who they are as a person, as opposed to, well, I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this, and today I'm doing this.
I think one of my favourite things, Tony, since COVID, and I had a team member who was working in Melbourne, for example, more recently, and have had teams all across the world. And it's really does force you to think about how we can create that connection remotely. And you do have to put a lot more effort in. So my favourite finding since COVID is the virtual coffee catch-up. And it's, let's just grab a cup of tea, let's just sit down and have a catch-up over video. How are you going? And I think often when you do have a team that is with you face-to-face occasionally, as well as a virtual team, you do sometimes forget. And I think it's really important that we do make extra time to check in with those that are not in the office with us. And those virtual coffees, this particular colleague of mine I still catch up with on a regular basis, and we both really enjoy just to check in, how you're going, what's going on in your world? Is there anything that you're thinking about that you want to unpack? And we both come away from those sessions, feeling nourished, that it was just an opportunity. But it's very, very rare that we get to meet face to face. And I think
that's one of the keys when you're working virtually and remotely, right? And we touched on it last time we spoke, Tony, is about leaders need to create a completely new framework around how their team will interact and work together. It's not just about meeting about the work. It's about how we create those water cooler moments and how do we create those social events, those morning teas where people can just connect with humans. That's the key. And whether it's once a week you're putting time in to virtually meet and have a coffee with your people, or whether you're creating a virtual morning tea of some sort and using a completely different, one of the things I encourage with the work I do and the leaders I work with is use a different type of technology to do the social stuff. Don't do it through Teams. Like, use a completely different technology so it's not associated with work in any way. I think that's really important for leaders, is they need to actually be more creative in that.
I like that, yeah. And there's some creative leaders out there. There's one, I just as you were talking through that, and you're talking about your water cooler and your coffee breaks, there's a leader who's quite a good friend of the show, Craig Brown, shout out to you. He actually has like a virtual foyer, I suppose you like. He actually has a room opened up in the particular, he uses Burst, and it allows you to set rooms, and he sits in that room, and it's just anyone can wander in virtually.
Yeah, awesome.
The leader is available. He's just there all the time. You want to chat with him? Door's always open. That's right. So that's a fantastic thing. The other one I saw, we did this as remote AF some time ago, but I often recommend it to people to go and check it out, as online escape room. So just to break the pattern, it was a really interesting thing for us. We found out lots of things about each other we didn't.
Yeah, for sure.
I like the virtual foyer. I think that's a fantastic
idea.
And
when you said that, the first thing that entered my mind, or what I envisaged, was before every meeting, we go into this virtual foyer to catch the lift.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
General chat before you actually then enter the meeting. That's immediately what I visualized when you said that.
And some of the great technology out there allows you to do that. You have things like, and we don't recommend anything here, but we see lots of them. There's Butter or Burst, or even Zoom allows you to do those things now. So you think about your technology. But Amy, you had some thought there.
I was just thinking about empathy and how important that is, tying those two things together. I think that the virtual foyer is an absolutely fantastic idea, and I'm going to try and implement that somehow. I think that's great. One of the challenges I find a lot is that I'm not available as much as I would like to be. Mm-hmm. And I think we have often been caught in this environment where it's just rolling meetings, because you have to book a meeting to have a chat with somebody to lock them down. And so I think being available and then creating the time, so when you are having these virtual conversations and you are able to read body language and you're able to say, hey, Tony, are you okay today? And, do we need to, let's have a virtual coffee and a catch up and to reconnect on a different level. I think those things, again, become really, really important to be able to build that sense of trust, that your team know that you're still looking out for them. You're still noticing whether something's gone wrong. And I mentioned earlier about behaviours. I think initially when COVID rolled out and we were all working from home, there was a lot of concern that, the organisations were watching our productivity and, you've got to keep working, And yet
they were. And they still are.
Well, there were a few, but those organisations that have done that haven't done themselves no favours. So
exactly, they have eroded that sense of trust, haven't they?
Yeah, they've removed this. Yeah, they've totally removed that sense of psychological safety.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm too scared to go and put a load of washing on because my keyboard count will stop.
I remember somebody putting a meme up. Those birds that go back. I don't know what they're called. And then they had one where they were pressing the keyboard, so it looked like you were still online and you're off having.
You can actually buy those. They're called jigglers, and they'll actually
jiggle mouse,
move your mouse and stuff like that, which is a very sad state of affairs. So for those watching this, don't do that.
No, but it also,
There's a link in the comments.
it also demonstrates, though, how that psychological safety is being eroded. That people think they have to grow it. Like, first of all, that someone's thought of, I don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. So what can we do? How can we use technology to protect ourselves?
Yeah.
So someone's gone off and designed this jiggler mouse, and everyone's buying it.
I wonder what the sales are for that.
It's huge.
But it's not a good thing. Let me just pick you up on something you were saying before and take a bit of a twist on it. I just want to go back to it a little bit. There's we're talking about leadership, and we're talking about the folks on leadership need to do this, but I think there's also a bit of a flip around the other way. We don't talk about EQ enough, and I think for leadership have taken a lot of hit. If you look at through COVID, now you move to remote and hybrid, and you've got the the exacerbation of all that work coming at them and the environment. So leaders are in the gun here as well. So it's easy to sort of just point at leaders and say, you need to as well. But I want to get your thoughts on. We talked about you got to make time for yourself as a parent. I think as leaders, there needs to be time. Leaders need to make time for themselves to have time.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. But that's everyone, right? Like, and to your point, not just picking on leaders. It doesn't matter where you are within an organisation. You can't just clock on and just be constant and clock off. Like, that's a recipe for burnout. You need to be able to make space in your day to connect with people, to network, to think, to just have time to go, where are we? Where's the team at? What are we doing? Just some time just to slow down so you can then speed up. Absolutely agree with you.
This is going to cost me, because if somebody hears this, they're going to say, you owe me $1 for saying it. But it's down to speed up. That's been my favourite saying the last few weeks. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, we need to slow down so that we can speed up. And by speeding up, I don't necessarily mean deliver more. It is about slowing down to connect, to make sure you're okay. It is to make sure your team are okay. Are we focusing on the right things? And the self-care, because EQ is becoming more popular from a buzzword perspective. We're starting to understand, but I think unfortunately it's coming off the back of that burnout. So more and more people are struggling with mental health these days because of that lack of connection. I think it was exacerbated with COVID, where we couldn't actually connect, and we're social creatures. Humans are social creatures. We need to be able to connect with people, virtually or in person. So that emotional intelligence becomes more and more important. I think as a leader, it's quite rare to find internally in organisations really great leadership coaching programs, and that's one of the things that I admire about the work that you do. It is very much about understanding yourself, to understand your own values, what it means to look after yourself and your self-care routines, to then be the best version of yourself for your family and for your team. So I think that's the biggest thing I admire about your leadership work. It is focusing on yourself first and your own emotional intelligence before you can show up and you can lead for other people.
But fundamentally, you can't lead other people unless you can lead yourself. So you've got to learn to lead you first before you can then take on the responsibility of others.
There's a great study out there that I'd encourage people to look at. Dr. Neil Preston is an Australian university study, and he does a lot on EQ, emotional quotient, and how that is just as important as any of the other things that we do. And it's a very good one, because collaboration is built on that EQ as well. And so if you want to collaborate better, you want to work better, focusing on that EQ.
There's a great book called Permission to Feel. It's Mark Brackett, which I would highly recommend to anybody that is looking to start their journey on understanding, to improve their vocabulary around emotional intelligence. And he has some great tools there, the mood meter. And his goal in life is to teach people that it's okay to feel, and here are the words to describe how you feel. And it is a brilliant tool for children, but it's also a brilliant tool for workplaces. And I think why I keep bringing up the children is I think we need to start young. We need to make sure that we teach the kids coming through now how to be emotionally intelligent, how to articulate how they feel, so that as emerging leaders and the next generation of the workforce, they're going to create a much stronger sense of psychological safety, both in person and digitally, for their teams, but also any of the digital ecosystems that we're creating. So we've spent a lot of time talking about work and the work environment, but when we're coming to work, we're creating things for people. And particularly these days when a lot of us are working in the digital space, we are building digital ecosystems that need to create a sense of psychological safety for people using them. So it flows in all the way through.
Just before we go any further, I counted you actually owe $3. You said $3. That's what I was doing. I was counting on my fingers.
I hope Sam's not watching, otherwise I'll have to pay.
Lovely. All right. I want to ask another question around this that struck me. Particularly, Amy, you're if I can say you're a data nerd, like myself.
Almost wore my T-shirt today.
Yeah. That's a compliment.
For those watching, I do know these ladies quite well. So, the data, you're very passionate about the data and what the data does to help us understand this and affect change with this. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that from you as well.
My soapbox is just down there, but I'll bring it out. I am very passionate about this, and I don't know how much longer we've got on the podcast, Tony, but for me, I am incredibly passionate about data, but that's because I've been on a bit of a journey with it. For me, I talk a lot about identity, and identity to me is built up of all of the labels that we inherently are assigned when we're born. So we're given all of these labels from day dot. We're given a sense of identity, and I don't want to get into gender politics, but we are assigned all of these labels and we collect them as we go. When we build relationships, we acquire more labels. When we acquire assets, we acquire more things. All of these are data points. All of them build up to create a sense of identity, create a sense of self, and it's a way of us understanding who we are. When we apply that to a digital world, we have a digital footprint. And so I'm sure everybody that's listening is thinking about their digital footprint. We have social media profiles, LinkedIn profiles. All of these things are about collecting data, and they all paint a picture of who we are, what we have, who we're connected to, and how we behave. And it's that collection of all of those different attributes that, to me, is something that we need to spend more time understanding from an ethical perspective, how we then make judgment based on all of that data. So I spend a lot of time nerding out around data models and data tables and what data have we collected and what do we infer from that data, but then how do we apply an ethical understanding to that data so that we can create value for people. My goal is to make sure that whatever environment that we create using that data and whatever value we create creates an ecosystem for people to thrive. So we often talk about using data for good, and that's really important to me, making sure that wherever any organization is collecting data from an employee perspective or from a consumer perspective, that data is respected and that data is considered in the context of just life. And life is fluid. So how you behave one day might be entirely different from how you behave in 6 months' time if you have some really significant life events. So that's how I think about data a lot, probably too much.
But it's interesting.
No, go.
I was going to say, it was interesting. The interesting point about that is you are collecting, or as you say, it is, especially as an organisation, you're collecting all these data points on a person, whether it's physical or digital. But more so in a digital space, when you're collecting those data points without context, in a lot of instances. How do you do that in a non-judgmental way?
Yeah.
Was that a question to me, or was that a statement?
I can see you want to say something on it, so feel free. The soapbox is there. Jump on.
I think that's the ultimate question, is how do we do that? And to me, it's all contextual. So it's all about trust. We talked earlier about that interplay between relationships. So it's individuals or your organisation that you work for, or an organisation that you shop with or bank with, or that you're interacting with. There has to be a sense of trust. And that trust, whether it's a psychological concept of safety, that, yep, I'm safe to share my data with you, or that you will protect my data. That's really important, and it shifts. Trust is contextual. So the trust that you need to create with your consumers or with your employees in a digital capacity is going to be different from the type of trust that you create face to face.
So I have a question that goes with that now, which is generative models and AI and digital psychological safety all come into play now. So I thought I'd leave that to the very end here so we could sort of geek out, nerd out on that as well. Ladies,
If I just leave you two, let you have a moment.
I think what's that? There's that application of the data and the geek piece. There's a human piece that's affected by it as well, which is why this is an interesting balance of having both here. But yeah, you can.
Oh, look, this is the space where it gets really exciting, and I get goosebumps talking about it. I think it's really interesting to watch how AI is affecting the way that we think about identity and trust. The conversations are different. It depends on what lens you're looking at AI from. You can find an argument for and against. You can find an argument that AI is going to take over the world, or you can find an argument that it's incredibly helpful and it's going to, help us with medical scenarios, looking through big data sets to be able to identify patterns to help us preempt medical conditions a lot earlier, versus other cyber attacks and bits and pieces. So I think there's a full spectrum of different scenarios that we need to watch. Where I come at it from is very much the ethical data for good perspective. I'm excited by what Gen AI is coming up with. I'm excited about the conversation. I know it's still immature, but I know that's the direction that we're going in. And I think the important thing to always anchor in is human first, and understanding that it is the humans that are actually generating that data in the first place. So without the humans and the activity and the interactions, there is no data. So whatever AI is doing with that data or creating from that data was inherently human to start with. So we need to consider that from an ethical perspective.
Or was it? Because when you get to a certain point in development and maturity, right, AI could be using data that was previously created by another AI. Eventually you will go down the chain and eventually it will become human, but how many layers in between? Sorry, just went down the rabbit hole.
That's the best part of this space, is there are many, many rabbit holes to explore.
Yeah. I think the question for me is what effect on the actual digital psychological safety is it do we have to watch out for? That's the question.
It's an interesting space, and I don't think we have enough experience with AI to really understand what that impact will look like. It's very easy to say initial impact, and I think, sorry, I'm kind of stumbling on my words here, but I think too it depends which generation you're talking to as well. If you're talking to maybe our generation or a little bit older, it's probably a sense of, I don't trust this and I don't feel safe, and it's probably an immediate eradication of any form of sense of psychological safety. But then there would be other people that would interact with it without, I know this is I don't know whether I should do this. I got an image from my daughter the other day. This is clearly AI in some form of sense. And and it's a scan
Cheers.
of her dog.
Oh my goodness gracious me.
You know what I mean? Like that's a generation that has no, just loves the use of technology and any, you know, and so I think AI very much has the ability to erode psychological safety at a very rapid rate, more rapidly than a human could. But at the same time, like everything, I think it's a case of, as a leader, as a parent, as a human being very conscious of how others feel about the experience and how can we make sure that we can create a conversation that helps people understand.
If I can add to that, I heard one of the school children the other day saying, I Googled it, so it must be true. Right. So, and I mean, that just made my heart sink. But that's the generation. These kids are going to grow up with AI. Well, that's just normal. They're not even going to talk about AI because it's going to be embedded in everything that they do.
And that's not just this generation. So, like, I would actually call my children previous generation because they're in their 20s now. And my daughter, when she was in her teens, put her sister's phone in the microwave to charge it because that's what Google said you could do, right? Obviously, it was the iPad, completely destroyed it. And so after that incident, when she came forward with an opinion, it was like, so where have you sourced that information?
Yeah.
Have you looked at what their credibility, like what's their credentials? Do you think they're a credible source? Like I had to begin educating her because there was that assumption that, well, it's online, it's got to be right.
And these days we're so busy that we outsource a lot of our decision making. So if it's easy to find, then it's easy enough to just outsource. So I think it is definitely something that we need to keep an eye on. And you know, there has to be a really healthy conversation about what are we using that data for and what do we rely on it for. So definitely think it has huge benefits, absolutely huge benefits, but there's always a dark side if we're not keeping an eye on it.
So that was, I don't know if we actually answered your question.
Oh, no, it was great. We touched the tip of a very large iceberg. Look, our time's actually right close to the end, so it's been a wonderful chat with yourselves, and what I would be proposing is that we come back again and go a little bit deeper on that would be fantastic. Thank you so much for being on, Talking Remote today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Those watching this, don't forget, if you like what we're doing here, join the Teamcraft newsletter. You can subscribe, it's in the show notes. Join us at remoteaf.co. Click on the community button. Fantastic. Lots of people, lots of these conversations happening. And of course, thanks, Kathryn and Amy. It's been a wonderful chat on Talking Remote today. I'm looking forward to having you back again.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, look, love it. It was a great conversation.
Lots of fun. Thank you. Come back and talk about AI again.